Retro.
Hello there. This is James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continuously unexpected. So uncivilized.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And the bad news, it's Monday, but it's not all bad because that means we get to kick things off with another episode of our The Clone Wars rewatch. But before we get into that, Jay, remind everybody where we can be found on social media.
Sure thing, Dennis. Super easy to do. You can hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
All right, the dish is aligned, the signal is boosted to maximum output, the shield is down, we are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, like I said, we're returning to our rewatch of The Clone Wars, and this week we are looking at episode 7 of season 1, which is called Duel of the Droids. This is the second part of a 2-part arc. The first one was Downfall of the Droids, and that was where R2-D2 goes missing, and Anakin is not coping well with it. With that reminder out of the way, Jay, you want to go ahead and give everyone a summary of what this episode is about?
Sure. 2-part arc. That's almost a tongue twister.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. While searching for General Grievous's secret base, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Rex intercept a transmission from R2-D2. They follow it to Ruusan and discover the Separatist listening station. While Anakin searches for R2, Ahsoka, Rex, and the clones fight off the battle droids while they attempt to destroy the station. General Grievous confronts Ahsoka and she narrowly escapes. Meanwhile, Goldie proves to be a traitorous astromech and complicates the escape of the Jedi and the clones until R2 defeats him in a droid combat. As the episode ends, Grievous has fled, the station is destroyed, and R2 is reunited with Anakin.
Okay. So what did you think about this one overall?
Well, of course, I had to giggle because Grievous has fled.
Mm-hmm.
Once again,
he's a coward.
Yes, and he will flee like he always does. No, this one was fun because I was so excited to get into this one because after last episode, and again, I texted you really quick and said, "Are we just doing the one or are we doing both?" Because it really does flow nicely into the other one. And one of the things that I do like about this particular episode is the fact that it does show a little bit more of what we've come to know as the camaraderie of the clones.
Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that they were kind of ripping each other about who had to fly down with Goldie and Rex got stuck with them, and so they were all kind of like laughing about that.
Yeah.
And then just once again just reiterating how important R2 is in Star Wars, just in general. I mean, this little droid is so important to everything. I mean, he's kind of the linchpin of the entire saga in a lot of ways, he could be argued.
Yeah. I wanted to get into a bigger discussion about R2-D2 in just a minute. But I like this one as well. I liked it better than the previous episode. I think my gripe was that one is like, people just aren't doing smart things. After Goldie continually makes things worse. They don't get him checked out. He's either got a malfunction or he's in fact a traitor, and no one bothers to check on that. And then of course, he goes out of his way to sabotage their efforts in this episode. But by the end of this episode, no one has any doubt that he's a traitor. I mean, Ahsoka actually overhears him talking to General Grievous, but there's some good action in this one. I liked when the clones and Ahsoka faced off against Grievous. And then when Anakin and the clones and later Ahsoka show up in the hangar waiting for the Twilight to come down there and rescue them, fighting off against the Vulture droids and some super battle droids. There's a lot of great action in this. Grievous, we were making fun of him for having fled and run away again at the end of this episode, but he was actually on the scary side when he was hunting down Ahsoka here, and more menacing than he frequently comes off. Um,
Oh yeah.
but speaking of which, one of the featurettes that they have on StarWars.com for this episode is Dave Filoni talking about Ahsoka fighting Grievous. And he talks about how, she's small, she's quick, and that gives her an advantage. But at this stage in her life, it's not enough for her really to take on Grievous and win. And the thing is they needed a confrontation with Grievous for this episode, but it couldn't be Anakin. And he specifically references the fact that, their first meeting is in Revenge of the Sith. And it's not explicitly stated that. It's, it's Anakin saying, oh, General Grievous, you're taller than I imagined. And, there they are. And it's clear that that's that first meeting. And so this is how they worked. And they've kind of had to dance around this the entire series, that they could not have those two come to face face. And you and I have been talking about that since we started doing this rewatch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you had mentioned how, they'd just been very careful to preserve that. And in fact, they definitely did. And, and I was thinking about that too, just watching Ahsoka with Grievous. And I mean, obviously Ahsoka is very confident in her abilities, but realistically, I mean, Grievous was kind of toying with her a little bit because he could very easily have just wiped her out and had no problem doing so. I mean, even, I was trying to once again put myself into my first watch shoes, if you will. And so I was thinking when he picked her up by her throat and he could have just easily just crushed her, right then and there. I mean, no problem whatsoever. She would have crushed like a little peanut. That's horrible to say, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And
Well, let me interrupt
but
you for just a second. That was the exact moment I was thinking of when I said that he became creepy and more dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, picking someone's up the throat and start to strangle them while he's taunting her. And it's only because she manages to force, the lightsaber blade to slice off that one hand that she got away.
Yeah.
But she otherwise stood no chance. I mean, it kind of reminded me a bit of Jurassic Park when the kids are in the kitchen hiding from the raptors. She's crawling around those shelves in that storage room, doing something slightly similar. And then she manages to escape through some ventilation and then, uses the force to get her lightsaber back from Grievous. So anyways, I'm sorry, interrupted you. What else were you going to say?
No, you're totally fine. And I was pretty much done with that thought anyways, but I'm wondering, that you thought that you brought that up, if there was any kind of inspiration whatsoever from Jurassic Park, because that's a really good observation.
Yeah. I don't know for certain, but that, like I said, that's what it reminded me of when we got there.
Yeah, for sure.
One of the other neat references in this episode was the moon where they were. This was Ruusan. The name of the station itself is Skytop Station. It looks like the central orb from a Lucre Hulk Federation battle cruiser that, we got to see plenty of in Phantom Menace. But Ruusan in Legends was the planet where the Sith faced off against the Jedi, and then the Sith unleashed the Thought Bomb in the Darth Bane trilogy.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. And you and I both absolutely love that trilogy. So it's so cool that that reference is in there for sure.
Right. And then Ruusan also featured in Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. There is a key boss battle, the final boss battle between Kal Katarn and I can't remember the bad guy's name, the wannabe Sith in that one as well, there on Ruusan, and they take advantage of the captured souls of the Jedi and Sith that were victims of that thought bomb there. And so this is dipping into some Star Wars Legends territory there. And they told us when Legends was going away that there'd be some references, and there's only a kernel of truth in some Legends, and sometimes it's cool, sometimes it's patronizing, but the reference here, without they never get to the planet's surface. They never make reference to what happened with Darth Bane and the Sith and the Jedi there, and probably wisely, because it would have been a distraction, if anything, I think. But still, that was a neat little reference there.
It is. And it's nice that, as you said, there's always a bit of truth in Legends, as Ahsoka would say, and that those little kind of Easter eggs or nuggets or whatever you want to call them trickle their way through into the storytelling, because I think, like you said, it would have been maybe distracting or at least, unnecessary to have a lot of exposition about that. But for people that have either, as you said, played the Dark Forces game or who know anything about the Darth Bane trilogy, the ears definitely prick up and like, oh, I know this place kind of thing, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, you brought up R2-D2, and you were talking about how he's kind of a linchpin here and how important he is because how much information he has. And, Obi-Wan, at the beginning of this episode, when Anakin, Ahsoka, and Rex contact him, said, hey, we found the station. Like, oh, great, blow it up. And then Anakin says, well, it's a little bit complicated because we're pretty sure R2-D2's there. And then Obi-Wan says, go to that station, destroy the droid. This is not a rescue operation.
Mm-hmm.
And we brought this up the last time we covered the Clone Wars, that Obi-Wan makes the comment that, astromechs are a dime a dozen. He's got no sentimentality when it comes to R2-D2 whatsoever, despite the fact that R2 has been important in missions to rescue friends. I mean, heck, he was part of the, Malevolence arc. It was on the Malevolence with him and Anakin and Padme and 3PO. And so, but still, he's perfectly willing to sacrifice R2-D2. And so, I mean, I was still a little disappointed in Obi-Wan. I mean, he's being a good Jedi and not forming attachments to a droid. I get that. But then, Anakin does turn it into a rescue mission there. So I don't necessarily have a specific question, but I do have a follow-up but I want to just kind of get your thoughts on Anakin's obsession with getting R2-D2 back and Obi-Wan's nonchalance about the whole situation.
Right. So, as I was saying before, it goes, I think for Anakin anyways, it goes a lot deeper with R2 than just the fact that he has all this tactical information, because as we said, R2 was a wedding present from Padme to him. And so there's definitely a sentimental value there, which I don't know if Obi-Wan knows that. I know that he's always suspected that there's, been things going on between Anakin and Padme. But I think for Obi-Wan, part of it is because Anakin was already sort of on that teetering edge of attachments from the very beginning as it was because of the whole thing with his mother. So I don't know if maybe this is just Obi-Wan's way of, trying to continue to still teach his Padawan, some lessons, and that this is where your focus should be and this is what we need to do. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think Obi-Wan was definitely a lot more ambivalent towards R2 than I would normally anticipate him being. And especially, like I said, given just the fact of the history that they've been through, all the way back to Naboo, and I don't know. It seems, in some ways, it seems a little out of character for me, but, I understand that they needed to do that to propel this little story forward and give Anakin the reason to completely go against it, because that's what Anakin does. Anakin does his own thing, and when has Anakin ever listened to orders, kind of thing? So so it just is true to character for Anakin as well.
Okay. After R2-D2 is rescued, why didn't Obi-Wan and the Jedi Council then order Anakin to erase his memory?
That's a great question. One I do not have the answer to.
Yet, at the end of Revenge of the Sith, 3PO gets his memory wiped, and he's not carrying around like Republic secrets.
And yet R2 is. And Obi-Wan has known this from the get-go.
Then the one thing 3PO and R2-D2 have in common in that situation is that they are both aware that Anakin is the father of Luke and Leia. But it's deemed too dangerous for 3PO to have this information, but not R2-D2. Yet, R2 was captured here, dismantled, and they were pulling out the secrets before Anakin, Ahsoka, and the clones showed up here. So I'm not sure it is an inconsistency, but it does present some flawed logic for Star Wars storytelling there.
But then again, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, they had to have 3PO's memory erased after Revenge of the Sith simply because he demonstrated no recognition of Luke and Leia and that they were related or that he knew Anakin or anything like that, when he clearly knew who Anakin was, Anakin Skywalker, and should have been capable of putting two and two together. So there is a story reason from getting all of that done. They had to do it. it's just not particularly satisfying. And I'm not even talking about this episode at this point, but it just reminded me here, it's not particularly satisfying to me. The reason that, just, have the protocol droids memory erased, and nothing happened to R2D2, despite the fact, time and again, throughout the Clone Wars, he's routinely carrying all this important data, and he never gets his memory erased.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a couple of thoughts about that.
Mhm.
One, I think that because 3PO likes to talk, and he can obviously talk basic
Mhm.
to anyone that was seen as a threat, that he might blab something. Whereas for R2, unless you understood astromech, you're not going to understand what he's saying. But secondly, I think R2 has proved over and over again that he is an asset in that, number one, he knows how to keep his mouth shut, literally and figuratively.
Mhm.
And two, I think, at the point, especially with Revenge of the Sith, I think that Bale, operating as a fulcrum agent himself, appreciated the fact that R2 was basically a living knowledge base of everything that had ever happened, that if they were to wipe his memory, that they would be essentially like burning down the biggest library that was ever built. You know what I mean? So, as much as he might be a threat if someone else got a hold of him, if astromechs are a quote unquote dime a dozen, unless they know who R2 is specifically, they're just going to think he's an astromech. And
Okay.
why would they think he's any more special than any other astromech?
I've got two pieces of pushback on all this. What secret has C-3PO given away that would lead anyone to think that he is a risk? And why would anyone think that he is a protocol droid unique from all the other protocol droids? I mean, what's good for the astromechs is also going to be good for the protocol droids, is it not? I mean, he's
Mhm.
got a similar coloring to tons of other protocol droids that are out there.
Mhm.
And
No,
so,
that's fair. Mhm.
and I can only think of really one instance. I mean, there is an episode of the Clone Wars where both 3PO and R2 get captured by Cad Bane
Yes.
and get some stuff dragged out of them, and then sent back. And then later in the Poe Dameron comic, 3PO is having a conversation with Poe Dameron, which gets overheard by someone, which leads to consequences to somebody else. But it's not like he was talking out of turn. He was talking to Poe Dameron. This is not a case of him talking too much. He was answering a question
Mhm.
in this case. The other thing about this is if I'm the Empire and I raid a rebel ship and there's a bunch of astromechs around and I want to know where a rebel base is, I'm dragging that information out of all of their memory banks if I
That's a
can.
good point. Mhm.
I'm not being discriminate on this, and that's routinely why these astromechs have their memories erased, because they do carry mission sensitive data. And then they also will say in some sources that, if they don't have regular memory wipes, it makes them a little,
Like
I don't
glitchy.
know. Yeah, I mean, they
Mhm.
get personality quirks, which can be an
Mhm.
issue and things like that. And so that's one of the benefits of wiping their memory. And then there's other issues. There's other examples out there you can look up of astromechs doing something similar, stuff like that. But again, I don't want to get this too sidetracked here. I've always been a bit defensive of the reason why 3PO had his memory wiped. I don't like the fact that it was Bail Organa who just, casually said that to do that in
Yeah.
this situation. I would like to have seen it be more the result of an accident, or have someone ask him to make that sacrifice the way they did in Rise of Skywalker,
Mm.
which is, if
Mhm.
you access this Sith databank, you're going to lose your memory. And he
Yeah.
realized everything that was on the line, and he made that sacrifice. It could have been a heroic moment for 3PO in that
Mhm.
situation. So,
No, I totally appreciate where you're coming from on that one, because I'm a big 3PO apologist as well. I really am. I've always loved him, and I think he gets a bad rap sometimes too, for
mhm,
sure. With R2 though, I think obviously there's a reason why he had to keep all that intact, because when he gets to see Obi-Wan again in A New Hope, and I don't remember ever owning a droid, kind of a thing.
mhm.
But realistically, R2's always been there.
But they could have easily wiped R2's memory, and it wouldn't have made any difference to the sequel
Sure.
trilogy, or to the
Sure.
original
That's
trilogy, I
true.
should say.
Mhm.
But they specifically wiped 3PO. Well, anyways, that is what it is. We spent a lot of time talking about something that's really only tangentially related to this episode. So we'll move on here. You brought up the moment where the Twilight reaches Ruusan and they're hovering above the station and they can't land because that'll tip everyone off. It's not like they go stealth for that long. They get discovered pretty quickly after they get on there. But Ahsoka, she goes charging off the side of the Twilight, follow me, boys. And then Anakin's right behind her. And then the rest of the clones. And Rex is carrying Goldie. Does Goldie not have boosters? Did he really need to be carried?
Well, I think I remember reading somewhere that Anakin put boosters on R2 special because those particular models of astromech didn't have them. So I don't know, but Goldie was
when would that have happened? Because R2 had them in Attack of the Clones before Anakin ever had R2-D2.
That's a good point. And actually, didn't he have them? Well, now that I'm thinking about it, didn't he have them on the ship, Padme's ship too? Maybe not.
Well, in the deleted scene from the Phantom Menace, he falls over the edge of that landing platform and uses the boosters to get back up on it.
Boosters to get back. Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I mean,
Yeah,
R5-D4 had them in The Mandalorian.
Mhm.
So, and I can't imagine those were a special ad. So,
Well, I guess maybe the only thing I can think of is that perhaps his boosters weren't strong enough to keep him from having too hard of a landing, and that they needed him to survive, so that was the whole reason why they were bringing him, is because he needed to crack into the systems.
I appreciate your creativity. Again, I don't want to make a big deal
here, Dennis.
No, I hear you. This is the problem with these gigantic expanded universes. And when you go to tell these stories, we know there's a story group. It kind of got put into place after Legends and stuff like that. But this is a little bit of an inconsistency. I mean, R2-D2 has boosters. R5, a different series, also has these boosters. Why doesn't an R3 have them in this case? But the is Rex gets to, has to carry him down there. So yeah, another thing that stood out to me here is that we haven't really talked about Ganacht, who was the Trandoshan who salvaged R2-D2 in the first place, and he brings him here to Ruusan to turn him over to Grievous and get paid. And he gets greedy when he learns about all this great Republic intel that R2-D2 is carrying. He basically says, "This droid's more valuable, so my fee just went up." And Grievous's response to that is to run him through with the lightsaber. And it struck me at this point that, there's a couple episodes in this season of the Clone Wars that definitely feel like they skew towards that 12 and under audience, but not this one. And so, what do you think about that? I mean, that between strangling Ahsoka, lifting her up by the neck in a strangler, and this one, it doesn't offend my sensibilities. And I let my kids watch it, and at the time, and probably with a little bit of explanation there, but that's pretty brutal.
It is indeed. And there's been quite a few little events such as this in the Clone Wars. I mean, we've talked about it, a lot between different types of episodes, such as beheadings and, Asajj Ventress running the one clone trooper through and kissing him at the same time, kind of a thing, as she allows him to reach his demise. So yeah, and that's one thing about the Clone Wars that I always thought was a lot different than some of the things that we've gotten since then. And yeah, I mean, things like Rebels can get dark, but the Clone Wars definitely, teetered on that edge of, oh my gosh, kind of stuff for sure when it comes to kids stuff.
Yeah. It was, Ganacht was a bit stupid with his greed there. I mean, you're on the guy's station, you've taken him apart, and now you're trying to hold out for more money. I mean, come on. That's just a major character flaw.
But I mean, that's how those kind of guys are, I guess. They just greed and go more greed.
Yeah. And then Goldie here, gets finally outed as the traitor. We all knew. We had this conversation 2 weeks ago when we talked about the previous episode here about, it seems a bit obvious to the viewer that Goldie is a traitor here, but then they remove all doubt because he continues to make things worse, and then he gets caught talking to Grievous there. But we get the climax of this is R2-D2 is out on that platform, trying to open the hangar bay doors, and Goldie runs right up behind him and bashes him. And then they kind of get into a little bit of a astromech versus astromech battle where none of them really have any real weapons, but they're forced to fight each other with their little retractor arms and cables and splatter oil and booster rockets and things like that. I found that fight amusing, but how about you?
Oh, I loved it. I was like, droid deathmatch, let's go. I actually would have liked to have seen it go on just a little longer, but I understand, that they couldn't exactly make that the focus of the episode. But R2 knows how to kick butt. I mean, we've seen him do it time and again. And not only can he kick butt, but he's also very savvy about it too.
Yeah.
Like he's smart. He's a smart fighter.
Indeed, yeah. The most dangerous thing they had going on were their little arc welders, and I guess R2 has that little saw that he uses as well, but I'm not sure how useful that really was against the chassis of another R2 unit. But hey, he won. He knocked him off the edge, and Goldie flew into pieces. So
yeah, and R2 keeps his cool too. That's what I mean. Like he's smart. Like he knows what to do and when to do it, and he just went off into the sunset with Anakin after that. And you could see that little smug smile on Anakin's face too, as R2 sat himself back down into the socket. It was like he was just meant to be back home.
Yeah, now that I think about it, your comment on the smug smile there, at the end of this episode, we already talked about Obi-Wan's response to this and what Anakin did to go get R2-D2 back. But I mean, they lost 2 clones in the process. They went down there with Grievous, and I'm sorry, they went down there with Rex and 3 clones, and 2 of them got taken out by Grievous in that one fight. Whereas if Anakin hadn't gone off to find R2-D2 and himself, they may not have lost any. And then Ahsoka's response after Obi-Wan Kenobi's like, "You're Anakin one day," and then he turns off the holoprojector, and Ahsoka's like, he kind of has a point, which as much as surprising I found that from Obi-Wan, I kind of also found that surprising from Ahsoka too.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ahsoka's learning a lot from her master in that she knows that Anakin will do what Anakin will do, and she goes along with it because he is her master. But, she trusts his judgment. But in the end, I mean, she's also got a good head on her shoulders. And for her to point out, he's got a point kind of a thing is, I don't think that's out of character for Ahsoka one bit.
Yeah, I guess just the the whole point in matching Anakin and Ahsoka was that they are of somewhat similar personality, and they're kind of wild cards. And Yoda's thought was that if I pair them together, then Anakin is going to realize what Obi-Wan and other Jedi have been dealing with by putting up with him, and that will kind of bring Anakin around to being a more responsible Jedi. Yet we see what happens here. And so it's kind of this view of the Jedi Council, and Obi-Wan is our voice for them in this, that you did some very dangerous things, that you put your mission at risk, you lost soldiers to recover this droid, we have other droids, and then Ahsoka agrees with that, even though she's a bit more of the wild card, I guess is what I'm getting at. So I still found that a little bit surprising there. She's always been, as much as we've talked about being a wild card, she is a bit more reserved than Anakin, not willing to do quite as crazy things as he would do in that case. But
yeah, I think for Ahsoka, she's a little bit more, even at her age, she can see a bigger picture. And Anakin is always driven by his heart. He's so impulsive, and he's just always about, whatever he feels is right. And so I think, and Ahsoka does kind of, war with that a little bit herself, because she's even questioned Anakin about that. Like, why do you do this? And why is this okay? But yet she still goes along with most of it.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's all the points that I had marked down to talk about. Is there anything else from this episode you want to discuss before we wrap things up?
No, honestly, I think we hit it all. And so I was glad that we were able to revisit this, and and especially getting into the discussion about R2 and 3PO and the whole memory wipe. I think that's a lot of fun, even though it was a little bit of a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun to talk that stuff out.
All right. So yeah, next time we cover the Clone Wars, we'll be talking about Bombad Jedi, and this is Jar Jar's introduction into this series. So that'll be fun.
Mhm.
And it is a Jar Jar, 3PO, and Padme centric episode. We don't have any real Jedi in that one, just make believe Jedi. So that'll be fun. So make sure you come back next Monday and join us for that. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our rewatch of the Clone Wars. We hope you enjoyed it. And if so, make sure you hit subscribe to Podcast Stardust on your podcatcher choice so that you'll get each one of those rewatch episodes that typically happen on Mondays as they arrive. We'll be taking a break once we get to Skeleton Crew, but hey, that's a couple months away. So, also want to remind you can find our entire catalog of shows over on RetroZap.com, which is also home to the RetroZap Podcast Network, and such great shows as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s Case Files, Brews and Blasters, Dork Lair, Enjoy Stuff, Superhero Suite, and Warp Trails, plus some others. Lots of great things to find over there, and Jay Shepard is also getting ready to kick off of his 31 Days of Horror for October, where he talks about a different horror movie every single day. That's always a fun series. So if you're interested in that type of thing, make sure you go look at those articles. And if we could ask for a favor, one of a couple things would be great. Head over to Apple Podcasts or your podcatcher choice and leave us a 5-star rating and review. That's a fantastic way of helping others notice and find the show. Or share the show on your social media of choice with all your friends. Let them know if there's a particular episode that they might be interested in, or it is you like about Podcast Stardust. I know a few of you have done that from time to time. It's always appreciated. It means a lot to us, and it does work. We have noticed that people will click those links and come check things out. So with those things in mind, Jay, remind everybody again where we are found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as where else we can be found around the internet.
Absolutely. And yes, we do continue to just keep growing, and that is because of all of you. So, as Dennis just said, you can share out the show on our social media outlets, which is Instagram, Facebook, and X, conveniently at Podcast Stardust. And we also have some Pinterest boards. So, if you are in need of some Star Wars inspiration, you can head over to that. And we also have our 2 YouTube channels. So we have the traditional YouTube as well as our YouTube music channel. So you can head over to both of those, like, subscribe, and share those out. And both of those do also support reviews as well as interaction. So we'd love to see you come out and check those out. So we also have a Discord room, which is part of the RetroZap Discord server. So if you're up for some real-time chatter, you can hit up the link in our show notes. And Dennis was just running down all of the great RetroZap shows. All of them have their own Discord rooms as well. So if you are into talking about anything geekery in general, you can hit those up. And we also have a TeePublic store. So if you are in need of a closet refresh or some new swag, especially with the upcoming seasons changing and the holidays coming up as well, who wouldn't want a Podcast Stardust t-shirt, sweatshirt, coffee mug, or the like? So head over to TeePublic for that. And the link to that is in our show notes.
All right. Jay, remind everybody what you got going on in the world of cosplay.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So you can always find me on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And I was just recapping on our new show, my adventures over at the Cleveland Gaming Classic back at the end of September. And so you can check that out as well as all the new content, because I have tons of new pictures from that, as well as some upcoming events as well here in October. And I'm always sharing out other cosplayers as well. So if you want to catch me as Ahsoka, 2 different versions of Hera, my Fourth Sister cosplay, as well as my original concept Mandalorian, and some other fun stuff coming up. So some non-Star Wars stuff I'm always doing is Weird Barbie, as well as some other things that I've got on the horizon. So once again, that's at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we are doing another episode of Ask Me Anything Star Wars, where Jay and I will be asking each other a bunch of Star Wars related questions. We don't know what the other one's going to ask yet, and we'll get to there when we get there. And then on Friday, it is the weekly look at Star Wars news. So thanks for listening to episode 788 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.